So if you guys want to know more about how to create a personal corporations and what's the reason to create the personal corporations, we actually have the lawyer, Michael Stunden here. He's an excellent lawyer. He's the most knowledgeable one. He's the sharpest one, and we've been working with Michael for such a long time. So he knows everything about personal real estate corporations, and I'll ask you a lot of questions.
Sure.
So maybe you can explain to people, just make it as simple as possible so they know what's the reason why we actually creating the corporations, what's the reasons for them.
Sure.
I'll ask you tons of questions.
First of all, very nice to be here with you, Jana. It's always nice to see you, and it's love to have the opportunity to talk to your students through this service about what is involved in setting up and maintaining a personal real estate corporation and some of the advantages and disadvantages to having a personal real estate corporation.
Excellent. So that's good. So one of the first questions people always ask is, what's the reason that we actually have to do that? Because majority of them, and I'll tell you this based on my classes, most people, they do it as a sole proprietorship. Why? Because it's free, right? It's what everybody advised them to do in the beginning, and they say, hey, just call the office, call the government, and get the tattoo with the GST number under your personal name, so you're going to be personally liable for everything. And that's how most people, 99% of the real estate agents do. But when you drive by, and I always tell you guys, when you're driving by any on any streets, and if you see any billboards, all of those agents, if you look at their names and the pictures on the bottom, and all going to say a real estate personal real estate corporation. And I'm sure they're smart enough to do that, right? And you'll tell us all the reasons why those people do things like that.
Right. So Jana, the reason why realtors should consider having a personal real estate corporation is no different from any other business person conducting business either by themselves or through a corporation. So a corporation is a separate legal entity for tax purposes. So an individual who might own shares in that company is also a separate legal entity for taxation purposes, but the company itself has separate legal identity and is also a taxpayer. So if you're a realtor and you're treating this as a full-time job, because some realtors, as you know, just work part-time, but if you're a realtor working full-time and you think that you're going to be earning enough income to make it worthwhile to have your income earned through a corporation, which has a lower tax rate, then that's something you may want to consider as a realtor. So the major reason why people use PRECs, I'll just use the abbreviation for Personal Real Estate Corporation, PREC, is for tax purposes. So because the PREC is taxed at a lower tax rate, if, as a general rule, if you keep money in the corporation, the money's taxed at a lower rate, your income is taxed at a lower rate, the company itself could have expenses and would have expenses and can offset those expenses against the income. The company itself would have to file tax returns on an annual basis, just like you as an individual would have to do. And at the end of the day, if you set it up properly and actually do some income splitting, which we can come to, then the net result is that you would see more money in your pocket as a realtor at the end of the day. And that's really the goal in setting up a PREC.
Okay, so are you trying to say that most people just set up personal real estate corporations so they can save money on taxes?
Yes, and some people just says, I'm not an accountant, I'm a lawyer.
You're a lawyer.
And every business person should consider having their own accountant to help them, at the very least, with preparing their year-end taxes, but also to give them advice on how to set up a corporation if it's appropriate. And it's appropriate for the reasons you just cited, and that is to save money at the end of the day, because nobody wants to pay the government more money than they have to.
They have to.
And
exactly.
you should try to take advantage of the rules, the tax rules that exist, to make sure that you don't pay more money than you have to.
Exactly, because you guys working so hard, then we have to make sure that you actually put some money in your pockets and use it for some benefits.
That's very good advice.
So why don't we start with all the benefits?
Yeah.
Because we only want to hear what's the benefits, why should we actually do corporation compared to just do business under your personal name?
Right, and just before we get into that,
Yeah.
you were talking about corporations in general, so I'll emphasize again, or just remind your viewers, that a corporation is a separate legal entity. Corporation is owned by individuals, could be one or more shareholders, and those shareholders appoint directors who are tasked with managing the affairs of the company. So A PREC, just like any other corporation, is a separate legal entity, but has certain rules and restrictions attached to it because it's being used by real estate professionals, and the laws and regulations that govern the activities of realtors in British Columbia also deal with the rules and regulations surrounding those PRECs. But I can talk about the advantages and the disadvantages then if you like.
Yes, please.
So the major advantage would be for tax purposes. Okay. So at the end of the day, as an individual, if you're a shareholder of a PREC, you could see that you personally would end up paying less money in taxes than if you were simply conducting your activities as an individual. Now, as with many businesses, if you don't know that you'll make enough money as an individual to actually reap the benefits of setting up a PREC and maintaining it, and paying a separate licensing fee for the PREC every year, then you may want to start off simply conducting business as an individual and be licensed as a realtor and simply pay taxes as a realtor as an individual. At some point, if your accountant advises you that it makes sense that you're earning enough money to actually conduct your business through a corporation, then that's when you may want to consider forming a PREC. On the other hand, there's nothing wrong with doing it right away. If you believe that you're going to earn enough money.
If you're planning to do it full time. So
if you're planning to do it full time,
then maybe that's not worth it.
Exactly. So it may be something, it's relatively small expense to set up the PREC. I charge my clients $1,000 all inclusive to set up a PREC.
That's it?
That's correct.
That's really good.
Well, I'm a sole practitioner lawyer with very low overhead, so I can offer these types of services for probably less money than my colleagues downtown with higher overhead would charge. That's just the way it is.
Crazy.
So for a relatively modest amount of money, you can set up a PREC, and you have to file annual reports each year. So my cost to the client to do that is $300. So there's a main cost to maintain the company, but it's a relatively modest cost. So the point being that if you wanted to set up the PREC in anticipation of earning enough money to make it make sense for you from a tax perspective, then you might want to just do it right away. Alternatively, you can wait for a while and see how much money you're making and do it that way.
But that's the thing. So what I usually see, some people, when they advertise themselves under a specific name, and then suddenly they want to start making money, and now they want to change to personal real estate corporation. And now, because of the name, they might not have to find this. They can't find the same name as a corporation that they want to open, right? So it could be
it might be somebody with a name that might be hard to spell or to remember. So they might want to actually choose some other name that would be a coined name or some made-up name that would be attached to their company. And that's entirely up to you as the individual realtor what name you may want to use. So the first step would be, again, to do a name search to get that name. And then once we have that, we can then incorporate the company.
But that's the risk that they might take, right? Because if they start first as a sole proprietorship and they work under one name, everybody knows them under that name.
Sure.
And everybody, so they've been successful. And then they can't find the corporation name in the same name. That's could be a challenge. Right?
Yeah, no, it's a very good point. So that's a reason why you might want to form your PREC from day one.
Yeah. Exactly. Okay, so that's a good point.
So one of the advantages that we touched on then is the tax advantage. Another advantage that is indirectly related to the tax advantage is that you can use the company to do income sprinkling. So by income sprinkling, I mean that you can set up your company, and you as the individual realtor forming the company have to be controlling the company, which means that you have to have the voting shares in the company. Now, every company has what's called authorized capital, and when you set up the company, the lawyer who's setting it up will create different classes of shares. And a lot of times with the PRC, you'll create a company with non-voting shares as well as voting shares. So the realtor will have the voting shares, and the realtor's common law partner, spouse, child, or stepchild, under the rules relating to PRECs, can hold non-voting shares. The company would have what's called authorized capital, and that's one of the things that the lawyer would, as he or she is setting up the company, would identify the authorized capital for the company. A typical company would have, a PREC would have an unlimited number of Class A voting common shares and an unlimited number of Class B non-voting common shares. Now, common shares under the articles of the company are entitled to dividends, and you can also pay the shareholder a certain amount of income either through dividends or simply paying them as an expense, right, through your company. So what people will do is they'll do what's called income sprinkling, where they'll dividend the non-voting shareholders a certain amount of money each year. You're entitled to go up to a certain amount of money. And so by doing that, you're basically paying money to your common law partner, spouse, children, in a way that allows you to do that with paying very little tax on the money. And that's another reason why people set up a PREC. Not everybody has a common law partner, spouse, or child, but if you do, and you want to provide them with some income in a legal manner and reduce the amount of overall tax that you're paying because you're now sprinkling income to your
to my kids.
Yeah. Then that's
spouse,
another reason why you would want to use a PREC. So that's a tax-related advantage to using a PREC.
That's amazing. That's good.
Now, some people, when they set up a corporation, do that to make sure that they're not personally liable for any of the debts of the corporation. And a PREC can be used for that purpose as well. By that I mean, if the company, the PREC we're talking about here, incurs a liability with a supplier, let's say, and there's a dispute between the supplier and the PREC, then they as shareholders are not personally liable for the debt of the PREC. If, for instance, there was a lawsuit involving some money that was owing to the supplier and the supplier got a judgment, let's say, against the company. The judgment is against the company itself, not against the individual. So for that reason, it's another advantage to having a corporation. As a general rule, you as a shareholder are shielded from liability. It's the company, which is a separate legal entity, that's actually liable for the debt. So you as a realtor, unfortunately, are not shielded from professional liability.
Yes.
So you as a realtor have to be licensed as a realtor, but the PREC is also licensed. And it's a separate legal entity providing legal or real estate services. So both entities could be found professionally responsible for negligence, let's say. Yeah. And both entities would have to pay for insurance to make sure that they're covered in case they're found liable, either the individual or the company, for professional negligence, let's say.
Yeah, but we have the errors and omission insurance in British Columbia.
Exactly.
So it covers you up, right?
Exactly. Even though you as an individual may not be liable for the debts of the company, you as an individual realtor, you have your errors and omissions liability insurance, but you can't escape liability by being a shareholder of the PREC, which is the point I'm trying to make.
Makes sense. Okay,
Yeah.
that's good. So just don't do stupid stuff. Don't lie
As
to
a
your
general
clients.
rule, yeah.
Be nice to
As a
them.
professional person, you wouldn't want to make
Professional,
mistakes, but mistakes do happen.
Mistakes
That's why
happens,
we have insurance, professional liability insurance,
Okay,
to
so that's
protect
good.
the public.
But yeah, so benefits, I think it's pretty clear, right? So
Those would be the main benefits would be the tax-related benefits.
Okay, and usually when they meet up with you, then you can kind of guide them more into details and say, okay, this is what you should be doing with your family. This is how you would put non-voting shape.
Yeah, that's a very good question. So my answer to that question is this. You as a realtor should have an accountant.
Accountant.
So the accountant is actually the person who has a lot more experience dealing with the Canada Revenue Agency, CRA, and would be the person to give advice to the realtor in terms of the type of share structure that the PREC should have.
Okay.
So it's not really the lawyer. I can explain what having two classes of shares is all about, but the initial advice comes from the accountant. So my advice, based on dealing with realtors over the years, is that every realtor should have a bookkeeper and an accountant. Now, there's no law that says that you have to have a bookkeeper or an accountant, but I think as a business person who's earning good income and incurring expenses through marketing and otherwise, then it's important to have those professional people helping you.
Plus, it's an expense that you can write off at the end of the year.
Yeah, and if you have a PREC, then the PREC can write off that expense as a business expense because it's the PREC that's actually hiring the accountant to do that work.
So if somebody has a team,
Sure.
and I know a lot of people right now, because Vancouver right now, it's all about the team buildings, and a lot of people be part of the team, but they also want to know if they can become or have a personal real estate corporation, so they can do that.
So as a team member, you can be a team member through a PREC. You can either do that individually as a licensee, but a PREC is a licensee as well. The PREC can be a part of the team, but as a PREC, you have to identify the fact that you are a PREC. So under the Business Corporations Act, which applies to all companies in British Columbia, there are rules relating to when you have to identify yourself as a company. And it's in business contracts, in marketing material, etc. There should be something there that says that the individual realtor conducts business through the PREC.
Okay.
But the PREC can be a team member.
A team member, so that's perfect. So
Yes.
that's the answer of my questions. So Michael, so when somebody wants to open their personal corporations, do they actually have to open a separate bank account and treat it as a completely separate entity?
Absolutely, yeah. So again, a PREC is a separate legal entity. So that legal entity needs to have a bank account. Why? Because like every other legal entity, if that legal entity is earning income legally and is not stuffing the money under the mattress, then they typically deposit the money in their bank account.
Okay.
And then they have a checking account where they can write checks or use online banking to pay for expenses.
The brokerage, when you get paid, right? So the brokerage pays the money not to you, it pays directly to your personal real estate
Right.
corporation, and then you take the money from the personal corporation and pay yourself. Now, do you pay yourself as a dividend, or do you pay yourself as a salary?
You would pay yourself as a salary, so
Salary, okay.
because that's an expense.
Okay.
A dividend's not an expense. So you are taxed on income from dividends at a different rate than you're taxed on income. So
Yep.
now an individual, to the PREC, money paid to an individual like the individual shareholder,
Yeah.
who happens to be a realtor, is a business expense. So like every other corporation, you want to offset expenses against income.
Which is
And
good.
it's exactly the same thing that you've identified with a PREC. So that's what would happen. The PREC would pay money to the individual. Now, from time to time, the individual can take money out of the bank account, but it would have to be accounted for in due course as income.
As an income, okay. So whatever money you take from the corporation is considered to be as an income. And expense
Generally,
for the
generally speaking, you could actually lend money to the corporation.
loan, yeah.
So you have what's called a shareholder loan account, right? So
And they give it back.
Correct, exactly.
Supposed
So
to give it
just to be precise, the company could pay you money back in repayment of your shareholder loan, or it could pay you money as income. And you wouldn't need to identify that until later. That's why it's important to have an accountant who will take in all that information at the end of the tax year and go, okay, well, that was repayment of a shareholder loan account, or that was income.
Okay, definitely have an accounting for yourself, guys. And and then, but the company itself is the one that will be paying you, so that means it shows as an expense your salary, right? Basically,
Correct.
right? So that's really good. So you want to write off as much. What else can they write off? So your salary.
Oh, well, there's
and
lots
how
of
do you-
things.
tell us more.
You can write off all your marketing expenses, which are not insignificant as a realtor, because you want to let the world know who you are and how great you are.
Yeah, of course.
And so you might have fees that you pay to your brokerage as a team member, desk fees and that sort of thing.
Well, that's
So
all-
that would be again through the PREC. So any expense that you can think of that's a business expense, like literally office supplies and
Definitely get an advice from your accountant.
yeah.
So
But that's
something-
yeah, exactly the startup portion, especially where you want to know if it's important to even be a PREC.
So now I see why a lot of people do the personal real estate corporations. It makes a lot
Yeah.
of sense.
Yeah,
right?
I think
It's
so.
Like, it's like that's why I always had corporations set up, because that's how we save money, and that's
Sure.
why we don't pay that much back to the government,
Yeah.
right? 'Cause
Yeah, no, it's definitely something to consider as a realtor.
yeah.
Definitely, certainly, it's part of the toolbox of being a realtor is to
That's
maybe
amazing.
use a PREC.
And it's amazing how many people are actually not using this skill or this advantage of,
Yeah,
because they're making money.
crazy really not to consider it as something to do as a realtor, and it's for a
And you
relatively
can
modest
split
expense.
the income, right? So you can
And, yeah.
give it to your kids as a salary
Sure.
and this and that, right? So it's
Yeah, it's another reason to consider it.
oh, I love that. Okay, so the disadvantages, any?
Well,
I guess an expense in the beginning.
it's
which
an
is not
expense, but
expensive.
it's not that much of an expense. So
It's not
it's
a- it's like running a
$1,000
business,
plus
yeah.
$300 a year to
That's
maintain.
for the lawyer expense. For
Yeah.
the licensing expense, you guys have to understand that you have to pay for your personal license and for your corporation license. So that's kind of a double expense. But that license is for 2 years. So it's not like as 2020 right now, it's $900 per year. So it's $1,800 per person, per you, and $1,800 per a corporation. So you're going to pay $3,600 to start up.
Right.
But you can write it off as an expense at the end
Correct.
of the year. So it still balances it out.
And if you stop working as a realtor and you actually wanted to terminate the existence of the corporation, you can do what's called a voluntary dissolution. So,
It's pretty easy, right? So if you
Yeah.
decided not to have it, you can just cancel on it
Correct.
every time, pretty much,
Yeah.
right? So, Michael, tell me what you cannot do with the PREC, what's not possible to do.
sure. Okay, so a PREC is set up for a particular purpose, is to allow a realtor to operate his or her business through a corporation. So the rules governing those corporations provide that you can't use the corporation to hold or trade in stocks. You can't use it to hold real estate. You can't use it to conduct a real estate development corporation. So all those activities can be done through another company, but not through a PREC. So you should be cautious that you're only using it for the purposes that it's designed to be used for, or else the professional association will slap your hands.
Will come after you.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. But if they want to get into developments, if they want to take their money and invest into the stocks, what's the best advice for you?
Well, you can either do that personally, but it's also possible to do it through a company, as you've suggested you've done in the past.
Yeah.
It may be appropriate
Separate.
to hold your real estate holding through a company, and certainly if you're doing real estate development, for sure, because there's liability issues that you want to do that through a company.
Okay. Makes sense.
Yeah.
But definitely this one is only just for receiving the commissions, right? And dealing only with real estate. And that's
Correct.
It. Okay. It's good to know. Thanks so much, Michael, for giving so much information about real estate personal corporations, because most people, even if you Google it, I Googled it before I met up with you,
Sure.
I couldn't find any information. There was only one article about on the real estate council side with such a legal terms, and it's so hard to understand what they're trying to sell. So that was amazing. So that was easy to understand. Now, if anybody who's watching you, and if they're from British Columbia, and if they need any advice on businesses, can they come to you?
If you have any questions about general business law related matters, by all means, give me a call. There's no charge for consultations and to sort of figure out what the student, or by this time the licensee, may require. So yeah, I would encourage people just to give me a call if they have any questions about employment agreements, consulting agreements, banking law, pretty much anything you can think of as a business person. I've encountered those issues both as a lawyer and as on my own, because I've owned businesses before. I've owned and bought and sold lots of real estate over the years. So I have a lot of experience in working as a lawyer with just general business related issues over the years, but I've also experienced those as a business person, which I find is good in retaining professional advice. I usually like to, when I'm hiring a lawyer or an accountant, know that they've had experience in that area themselves.
That's a good point. Exactly. Thank you.
You're welcome. Boom.